The first time I saw my husband holding my cousin's hand, I did not cry. I stood across the street from a small restaurant in downtown Charlotte, watching them through the wide glass window. Daniel was leaning close to her, smiling in the soft way he used to smile at me. My cousin Vanessa rested her hand on his arm as though it had always belonged there. For a few seconds, I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe she was upset. Maybe he was comforting her. Maybe I had misunderstood what I was seeing. Then Daniel lifted her hand and kissed it. The traffic moved behind me. A bus passed. Someone laughed near the corner. The whole city kept going as if my life had not just broken into pieces. I quietly stepped away from the window before they could see me. My name is Naomi Carter. At that time, I was 34 years old and had been married to Daniel for almost 9 years. We lived in a comfortable 2-story home in a quiet neighborhood outside Charlotte, North Carolina. It was not a mansion, but I loved it. I had chosen the warm cream paint in the living room. I had planted roses beside the front steps. Every Sunday morning, sunlight came through the kitchen window and touched the wooden table where Daniel and I drank coffee together. At least, that was how our life used to be. I worked as a registered nurse at a local hospital. My shifts were long, and sometimes I came home with tired feet and an aching back. Still, I was proud of my work. Caring for people had always felt natural to me. Daniel worked in property sales. When we first met, he was not successful. He drove an old car that made a strange sound whenever it turned left. He wore the same 2 dress shirts to nearly every meeting, and he carried his lunch in a small paper bag to save money. I never minded. I believed in him before anyone else did. During the first few years of our marriage, I paid most of the household bills while he tried to build his career. I worked extra weekend shifts. I delayed buying new clothes. I even used part of the money my late mother had left me to help Daniel open a small office. He often held my hands and said, "One day, Naomi, I will give you the life you deserve." I would smile and answer, "I already have the life I want." Back then, I meant it. Vanessa was my mother's younger sister's daughter. We had grown up close, but we were very different women. I was quiet and careful. Vanessa was bold and charming. She was 32, with light brown skin, long black hair, and a graceful way of entering a room. She always wore beautiful clothes and expensive perfume. People noticed her before she even spoke. Her father had built a successful chain of car dealerships. After he passed away, Vanessa inherited several properties, investments, and a large amount of money. She never had to worry about rent, hospital bills, or working extra hours. Still, I never felt jealous of her. When Vanessa moved back to Charlotte after living in Atlanta for several years, I welcomed her warmly. She had recently ended a relationship and said she felt lonely. "You have Daniel," she told me one evening while sitting in my kitchen. "You have a real home. I have money, Naomi, but sometimes money makes a house feel even emptier." I reached across the table and held her hand. "You have us," I said. "You are always welcome here." After that, Vanessa visited often. At first, I enjoyed having her around. She brought flowers, helped me cook dinner, and made Daniel laugh with stories from her travels. On the nights when I worked late, she sometimes stayed to eat with him. I did not think anything of it. She was family. Daniel was my husband. Trust had always been the foundation of my life. But over time, small things began to change. Daniel started caring more about his clothes. He bought expensive watches and new suits, even though his business had not improved enough to explain the spending. He also became strangely interested in the wealthy people Vanessa knew. "What does her friend Marcus do?" he asked one morning. "I think he owns a construction company," I said. "And the man she had dinner with last week." "I don't know, Daniel." He nodded thoughtfully, as if every name connected to Vanessa was a door he wanted to open. Then he began coming home later. At first, he blamed work. "The market is changing," he explained. "I have to meet clients whenever they are available." I believed him because marriage had taught me to trust before I suspected, but there were evenings when I warmed his dinner twice before finally putting it in the refrigerator. There were mornings when his phone buzzed and he quickly turned it face down. Once, while he was showering, a message appeared on the screen. "Last night was perfect." There was no name visible. Only the first letter, V. My stomach tightened. When Daniel came downstairs, I asked him calmly, "Who is V?" He looked at me for a moment, then laughed. "Victor, a client. We closed a deal last night." "A client told you the night was perfect." He kissed my forehead. "You worry too much, Naomi." I wanted to believe him, so I did. That was the mistake I regretted most. Not loving him, not helping him, not trusting my family. My mistake was ignoring the quiet voice inside me because the truth felt too painful to face. 3 weeks later, I saw Daniel and Vanessa through that restaurant window. I drove home alone in complete silence. When I entered the house, everything looked exactly the same. My shoes were beside the door. Our wedding photograph still hung above the fireplace. 2 coffee cups sat in the kitchen sink, but the home no longer felt like mine. I sat at the kitchen table and waited. At 11:40 that night, Daniel finally walked through the door. He stopped when he saw me sitting in the darkness. "Naomi," he said softly, "why are you still awake?" I looked at the man I had loved for almost a decade. Then I asked the one question that would end the life I thought I had. "How long have you been in love with Vanessa?" Daniel didn't answer right away. For a long moment, he simply stood there with one hand still resting on the doorknob. His face lost its color. I could see him searching for the right words, hoping to find a lie that sounded believable. Finally, he sighed. "Naomi, it's not what you think." I looked into his eyes. For the first time in 9 years, I saw a stranger looking back at me. "Then tell me what I saw." He walked toward the kitchen and pulled out a chair, but I didn't invite him to sit. He lowered his head. "Vanessa has been helping me with business connections." I nodded slowly. "And kissing your hand is part of business." His shoulders dropped. The silence between us became heavier than any argument. "I never wanted you to find out like this," he whispered. Those words hurt more than a confession, not because he admitted the affair, because he admitted there was something to find out. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "So it's true." Daniel rubbed his face with both hands. "It just happened." "No," I said quietly. "Things don't just happen, they are choices." He looked at me as though he wanted sympathy. "You've been working so much, we barely spend time together anymore." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I worked extra shifts because we had dreams, because we wanted to pay off our mortgage, because I believed we were building a future together. "You asked me to support your business," I said. "I worked nights so you could chase your dream." "I know. I paid the bills when your company had no clients." "I know. I believed in you when no one else did." He couldn't even look at me. For the first time, I realized love doesn't disappear overnight. Respect does. I stood and walked into the living room. My eyes stopped on our wedding picture. We looked so happy. Daniel came behind me. "I'm sorry." His apology sounded empty. Not because the words were wrong, because they came too late. I turned around. "Do you love her?" He closed his eyes for a second. "Yes." 1 word, 3 letters, 9 years destroyed. I thought my heart would break loudly, but instead it broke in complete silence. The next morning, I still went to work. Patients needed medicine. Families needed answers. Life doesn't stop because your own world falls apart. I smiled at people all day while carrying a pain no one could see. When my shift ended, my best friend Angela was waiting outside the hospital. Angela had worked with me for nearly 6 years. She hugged me the moment she saw my face. "What happened?" That simple question opened the door I had been holding shut. We sat inside her car for almost an hour. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "Naomi," she said softly, "none of this is your fault. I keep wondering what I did wrong. You loved someone who didn't value your love." Her words stayed with me. That evening, I returned home expecting Daniel to be there. Instead, I found a short note on the kitchen counter. "I'm staying somewhere else for a while. We both need space. No apology, no explanation, just space." 3 days later, Vanessa called. I almost ignored the call. Instead, I answered. "Hello." Her voice sounded strangely calm. "I think we should talk." "What is there to talk about?" "I never wanted to hurt you." I laughed for the first time in days. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the sound of disbelief. "You didn't accidentally fall in love with my husband, Vanessa." She stayed quiet. Then she said something I will never forget. "Daniel deserves the life I can give him." I felt my hands shake. "And what life is that?" "A bigger house, better connections, financial freedom." I closed my eyes. "So love has a price now?" She didn't answer. Instead, she quietly said, "We're getting married." For several seconds, I couldn't breathe. "What?" He asked me yesterday. I thought I had already experienced the worst pain possible. I was wrong. The divorce papers arrived less than 2 weeks later. Daniel wanted everything settled quickly. He didn't fight over the house because it had been purchased mostly with my money. He simply walked away. At the courthouse, he signed the papers without looking at me. As he stood to leave, he finally spoke. "I hope one day you'll forgive me." I looked at the man I once believed I would grow old with. Then I answered calmly. "I forgive you, Daniel." He looked surprised. "But forgiveness doesn't mean I'll ever trust you again." He lowered his head and walked away. I watched the courthouse doors close behind him. I believed that chapter of my life had finally ended. I had no idea that the biggest surprise was still waiting, and that Daniel and Vanessa's perfect wedding day would become the day neither of them would ever forget. People often believe the hardest part of losing someone is the day they leave. For me, the hardest part came afterward. It was waking up in a house that had become painfully quiet. Daniel's favorite coffee mug was still in the cabinet. His old jacket still hung inside the hallway closet. Even his running shoes were by the front door, exactly where he had left them. For several mornings, I couldn't bring myself to move them. Not because I wanted him back, because I was still saying goodbye to the life I thought we had. I buried myself in work. The hospital became the only place where my mind stayed busy. Every patient reminded me that everyone carries a battle nobody else can see. One rainy Friday afternoon, my phone buzzed while I was finishing paperwork. It was a message from Vanessa. "Our wedding is next Saturday. I hope there are no hard feelings. Life moves on." I stared at the screen for a long time. There was no apology, no kindness, only pride. I quietly deleted the message without replying. That evening, Angela invited me to dinner. She looked at me across the restaurant table and smiled gently. "You look tired." "I am, but you also look stronger." I wasn't sure she was right. Some days I still cried in my car before driving home. Some nights I still reached for the other side of the bed before remembering no one was there. Healing wasn't happening all at once. It was happening one small breath at a time. Angela reached into her purse and placed a cream-colored envelope on the table. "It came to the hospital today." I looked at the elegant handwriting. My name was written across the front. I already knew who had sent it. Inside was a wedding invitation. "Daniel Brooks and Vanessa Mitchell request the honor of your presence." I couldn't help smiling, not because it was funny, because I had never imagined people could be so heartless. Angela looked shocked. "They actually invited you?" I nodded. "I guess they want everyone to believe we're one big happy family." "What are you going to do?" I folded the invitation and slipped it back into the envelope. "Nothing. You aren't going?" "No, I wouldn't either." I thought that chapter was over. Then, 3 days later, someone knocked on my front door. Standing outside was an older man wearing a dark blue suit. His silver hair was neatly combed, and he carried a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Carter?" "Yes, my name is William Harris." The name sounded familiar. "I was your late mother's attorney." My heart skipped. My mother's attorney. He smiled kindly. "May I come in? There are a few things your mother asked me to deliver when the time was right." We sat in the living room where my mother used to drink tea whenever she visited. Mr. Harris carefully opened his briefcase. "I've been looking for the right time to meet you. Your mother instructed me not to contact you until after your marriage reached a natural conclusion." I frowned. "My mother knew?" He nodded slowly. "She didn't know what would happen. But she wanted to protect you if life ever became difficult." He handed me a sealed envelope. On the front, written in my mother's familiar handwriting, were 5 simple words. "For Naomi, if you're alone." The moment I saw her handwriting, tears filled my eyes. She had been gone for nearly 6 years. Yet somehow she was speaking to me again. With shaking hands, I opened the letter. "My sweet Naomi, if you're reading this, life has taken a path I prayed you would never have to walk. Please don't believe that someone leaving you means you weren't enough. Sometimes people walk away because they cannot recognize the value standing beside them." I could barely continue reading. "There is something I never told anyone except Mr. Harris. Your grandfather left an investment in your name many years ago. I asked that it remain untouched until you truly needed a fresh beginning." I looked up in surprise. Mr. Harris quietly smiled. "There is more." He slid another folder across the table. Inside were legal documents, property records, investment statements, savings accounts. My eyes widened. "This can't be right." "It is. The total value?" He nodded. "It's just over $3.8 million. I stared at the papers in complete silence. My family had never been wealthy. My grandfather had quietly invested in commercial real estate decades earlier, and over the years those investments had grown far beyond anyone's expectations. My mother had kept it secret. She feared someone would love me for my money instead of my heart. I suddenly understood why she had waited. She wanted me to build a life based on love, not wealth. Mr. Harris gently closed the folder. "Your mother also left one final instruction." "What was it?" He smiled. "She said, tell Naomi never to use this money for revenge. Use it to build the peaceful life she deserves." For the first time since my marriage ended, I smiled without forcing it. But what I didn't know was that, at that very moment, Daniel and Vanessa were making expensive promises to each other, completely unaware that the perfect future they had imagined was about to collapse before they even said, "I do." The week of Daniel and Vanessa's wedding arrived with perfect weather. The skies over Charlotte were bright blue. The summer air was warm, and every local florist seemed busy preparing flowers for weekend ceremonies. Life moved forward. So did I. For the first time in months, I stopped checking my phone every few minutes. I returned to my morning walks. I started reading again before bed. The quiet inside my house no longer felt empty. It finally felt peaceful. Mr. Harris helped me meet with a financial advisor to organize my grandfather's investments. I didn't want a luxury lifestyle. I wanted security. I wanted freedom. Most of all, I wanted a future that no one else could take away. Following my mother's wishes, I decided not to tell anyone about the inheritance, not even Angela. Money changes people. I had already learned that lesson the hardest way. The Saturday of the wedding arrived. I had no intention of thinking about Daniel or Vanessa. Instead, I volunteered for an extra shift at the hospital. Helping others always reminded me that pain was temporary. Around noon, while I was checking on one of my patients, Angela hurried into the nurse's station. She looked completely out of breath. "Naomi, I looked up. What happened? You need to see this. She held up her phone. At first, I thought she was showing me wedding pictures. Instead, every local news page was reporting the same story. Luxury wedding ends in chaos after federal financial investigation. I stared at the headline. What? Angela quickly explained. Early that morning, just before guests began arriving, federal investigators had entered the luxury country club where the wedding was being held. The investigation wasn't about the wedding itself. It was about Vanessa's late father's business. For months, authorities had been investigating financial fraud connected to several companies that had once belonged to her family. The investigation had remained confidential until enough evidence had been gathered. That morning, search warrants had finally been executed. Guests watched in complete silence as investigators entered the venue carrying boxes of documents. Several luxury vehicles registered under Vanessa's company were seized from the parking lot. Bank accounts connected to the business were temporarily frozen while investigators continued their work. The wedding ceremony never even began. I slowly handed the phone back to Angela. I don't know what to say. She looked at me carefully. Neither do I. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Angela whispered, "Do you think this is karma?" I gently shook my head. I don't know. I just know it isn't something I wished for. The rest of my shift passed quietly, but my mind kept returning to one thought. Life has a strange way of revealing the truth without our help. Late that evening, my phone rang. The caller ID showed Daniel. I almost ignored it. Then I answered. Hello. His voice sounded nothing like the confident man who had left me months earlier. Naomi? He was crying, real tears. I don't know who else to call. I closed my eyes for a moment. What happened? They froze everything. What do you mean? Vanessa's accounts, her businesses, everything. He sounded completely lost. I didn't know. I believed him. Whether he had known or not no longer mattered. The choices that brought him there had still been his own. After a long silence, he quietly asked, "Can we meet?" I looked out the hospital window. Rain had started falling across the parking lot. There isn't anything left to talk about, Daniel. I made the biggest mistake of my life. His words were heavy with regret. I know. I thought money meant security. I remembered something my mother had written in her letter. The people who chase wealth often lose the things money can never replace. I softly replied, "Security doesn't come from someone else's bank account." He didn't answer. "It comes from character." Another silence. Then Daniel asked the question I never expected. "Are you happy?" I looked around the busy hospital floor. Doctors were walking quickly. A little girl laughed as a nurse handed her a stuffed teddy bear. An elderly couple held hands while waiting for test results. Life was still imperfect, but so was mine, and somehow I had found peace inside it. "Yes," I answered honestly. "I think I'm finally becoming happy." Daniel quietly cried on the other end of the line. "I'm so sorry, Naomi." This time I believed him, not because I wanted him back, but because regret had finally replaced his pride. Before hanging up, I said one final thing. "I truly hope you learn from this." Then I ended the call. I thought that would be the last time I ever heard Daniel's voice. I was wrong, because just 3 weeks later, someone knocked on my front door. When I opened it, Daniel was standing there alone. His expensive suits were gone. His confident smile had disappeared, and the words he spoke next would change both of our lives forever. I opened the front door slowly. Daniel stood on my porch with his hands in his pockets. The expensive confidence he used to carry was gone. His tailored suits had been replaced by a simple blue shirt and faded jeans. He looked older than the last time I had seen him. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I hesitated, then stepped aside. "This doesn't mean anything," I said calmly. "I know. We sat in the living room where we had once planned vacations, celebrated birthdays, and dreamed about growing old together. Now we were two strangers sharing the same silence. Daniel looked around the room. "You changed the paint." I nodded. "I needed the house to feel like mine again." He smiled sadly. "It looks peaceful." "It finally is." He lowered his head. "I've replayed everything in my mind 1,000 times." I didn't answer. "There isn't a single day that I don't regret leaving you." His voice cracked. "I thought Vanessa's money would solve every problem. I thought success meant having the biggest house, the nicest car, and the richest life." He laughed bitterly. "I was so wrong." I folded my hands together. "Why are you really here, Daniel?" He looked directly into my eyes. "I'm not here to ask for money. I'm glad. I'm here because I need to say what I should have said months ago." He took a slow breath. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me." I remained silent. "You believed in me before I believed in myself. You worked extra shifts so I could build my business. You celebrated every small success, and I repaid you by breaking your heart." Tears filled his eyes. "I'll never forgive myself." For the first time since our divorce, I didn't feel anger. I only felt sadness, not for myself. For the man who had traded love for the illusion of wealth. "I have a question," I said. He nodded. "When did you stop loving me?" He answered immediately. "I never stopped." I frowned. "Then why did you leave?" He looked down at the floor. "Because I became greedy." Those 4 words filled the room. I started comparing our life to everyone else's. I wanted more. I confused comfort with happiness. I confused money with love. He wiped away a tear. And by the time I realized the difference, I had already lost you. I looked at the wedding photo that I had never taken off the shelf. It no longer made me cry. It simply reminded me of a chapter that had ended. I stood up and walked to the fireplace. Carefully, I picked up the photograph. Then I handed it to Daniel. "You should keep this." He looked surprised. "Why?" "Because I don't need a picture to remember who I used to be." He stared at the frame with trembling hands. "I don't deserve this." "Maybe not. But carrying guilt forever won't change the past." For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, Daniel whispered, "Is there any chance we could ever start over?" I smiled gently. It wasn't the smile of a woman still in love. It was the smile of someone who had finally healed. "No." He closed his eyes. "I understand. I truly forgive you, Daniel. But forgiveness and reconciliation are not the same thing. My heart has already found a different path." He nodded slowly. "I was afraid you'd say that." "I know." He stood and walked toward the front door. Before leaving, he turned around one last time. "I hope someone loves you the way you loved me." I smiled. "I hope one day you learn to love someone the way you should have loved me." He quietly walked away. I watched from the porch until his car disappeared at the end of the street. That was the last time I ever saw Daniel. Months passed. I used my grandfather's inheritance exactly as my mother had wished. I created a scholarship fund for nursing students who couldn't afford college. I donated to a community health clinic that served families without insurance. I renovated my home not to impress anyone, but to create a place filled with peace. Every Sunday afternoon, Angela came over for coffee. We laughed more than we cried. Life slowly became beautiful again. One autumn morning, I visited my mother's grave. I placed fresh white roses beside the stone. Then I smiled. "You were right, Mom." I didn't need revenge. I just needed another chance to begin. As I walked back to my car, the cool breeze carried colorful leaves across the cemetery path. For the first time in many years, my heart felt light. I finally understood something that pain had spent years teaching me. The greatest loss in my life wasn't my marriage. It was believing my worth depended on someone else's choice. The day I stopped chasing the people who walked away was the day I found myself again. And if my story has taught me anything, it's this: money may attract attention, beauty may attract admiration, success may attract applause, But kindness, loyalty, and genuine love are the only things that can build a home that lasts. Sometimes life breaks your heart not to punish you, but to lead you toward the peace you never knew was waiting. And looking back now, I don't remember the day my husband left me as the day my life ended. I remember it as the day my real life finally began.